What if I told you? There's a part of you that's always watching, judging, quietly sabotaging every step you take. And no matter how hard you try to pretend it doesn't exist, it never goes away. This part has a name. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and one of the greatest thinkers of the human psyche, called it the shadow. And no, this isn't some poetic metaphor. This isn't a motivational speech. This is a raw, unfiltered description of the inner reality you spend your life trying not to face. The shadow is everything you've buried, everything you consider unacceptable, shameful, weak, or wrong about yourself. It's your anger disguised as sarcasm, your fear dressed up as procrastination, your envy hidden behind fake indifference, your arrogance masked as false humility. Since you were a child, you were taught that certain emotions, impulses, and desires were wrong. And in order to be accepted, at school, in your family, at work, you created a mask, an edited version of yourself. Nicer, prettier, more likable. But here's the brutal truth. Everything you tried to hide never actually disappeared. It's still there, alive, active, and in the silence, it's running your life. You think you're the one making decisions. You think you're free. But you don't realize that your outbursts of anger, your constant failures, your addictions, your patterns of running away, are all symptoms of what you've been trying to forget. Jung was ruthless when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Which means that as long as you refuse to face your shadow, it will keep running your life, from behind the scenes in the dark, pushing you into choices that sabotage your own goals. So stop asking, "Why can't I move forward?" Start asking, "What part of me am I refusing to see?" Because the very thing you're hiding is exactly what's controlling you. And now, it's time to understand where this shadow was born. You weren't born with the shadow. It didn't come fully formed. It was built, brick by brick, gesture by gesture, look by look. It all started the moment you realized that simply existing in this world comes with a trade-off. In order to be accepted, loved, and included, you had to leave certain parts of yourself behind. As a child, when you were scolded for crying too much, you learned that vulnerability wasn't welcome. When your curiosity was mocked, you learned that asking questions was dangerous. When your anger was punished, you internalized the belief that being assertive was unacceptable. And the result? Every part of you that got rejected was slowly pushed down into a kind of psychological basement, a place that's invisible, hidden, even from yourself. Jung described the shadow as the dark side of the personality, not necessarily evil, just repressed, denied, undeveloped. And here's the part most people never realize. Not everything in your shadow is negative. A lot of your forgotten talents, your strength, your assertiveness, your authenticity are trapped there too. Locked away, right alongside everything you were taught to hate about yourself. It's like you split your soul in two, the part you show to the world and the part you locked away. But here's the thing. What gets repressed doesn't just disappear. It shows up in distorted ways, in angry outbursts, in self-sabotage, in chronic procrastination, in addictions, in broken relationships. Behind every apathetic, lost, or disconnected man, there's an unprocessed shadow. And don't be fooled. Modern society encourages this. From a young age, you're taught to be functional, productive, agreeable, efficient, but never authentic, never whole. Your shadow was born from the collision between who you really are and who you believed you had to become in order to survive. And as long as it stays hidden in the dark, you will keep living a life that doesn't truly belong to you. The next step? Understanding how it controls you without you even realizing it. You think you're in control, don't you? That every decision you make comes from your rational mind, from your free will. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Your shadow controls you, and it does it quietly. No warning, no permission, no noise. It works behind the scenes, programming your behaviors, your impulses, your desires, your fears, and, most of all, your self-sabotage. You know that cycle you keep repeating? That toxic relationship you swore you'd never end up in again, but did. That project you started full of excitement and abandoned. That decision you know will hurt you, but you make it anyway. That's not bad luck. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's your shadow, pulling the strings. Jung was precise when he said, "The shadow forms a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." In other words, it's not enough to simply know it exists. You have to understand how it operates. And here's how it works. Everything you reject in yourself, you start projecting onto the world. You spot arrogance in others because you've rejected your own assertiveness. You see weakness in others because you can't face your own vulnerability. You look down on people who are unapologetically authentic because deep down, they remind you of how much you've mutilated yourself just to be accepted. That's the shadow's strategy. It hides and it reflects. Meanwhile, it drains your energy. It feeds your procrastination. It traps you in endless cycles of instant gratification, porn, food, social media, alcohol, anything to numb the pain of living a life disconnected from your own essence. And the worst part? You don't even realize you're doing it. You convince yourself it's normal, that everybody lives like this, that it's just a lack of motivation. But it's not. It's a symptom of a shadow you've never had the courage to look straight in the eye. And as long as it stays hidden, it will keep making your choices for you. Now it's time to understand how it shows up in your body, in your thoughts, and in your behaviors, in ways far more subtle than you ever imagined. Most men don't even realize it. They don't realize they're carrying an invisible prison inside themselves. A prison not built of walls, but of denial, of escape, of lies they tell themselves. And this prison has symptoms, signs, silent clues that reveal the shadow is the one in control. You feel constantly exhausted, even when you haven't done anything physically demanding. You wake up tired, as if just existing is a burden. That's not physical. That's psychological. It's your energy being drained by the constant effort it takes to keep your true self repressed. You live distracted, disconnected from the present, always searching for something to fill the void, scrolling through your feed, opening a dozen tabs, eating when you're not even hungry, buying things you don't need. That's your shadow creating noise, keeping you away from the silence, the very silence where you could and should finally meet yourself. And then there's the misplaced anger, that stress that boils over at the smallest things. Traffic, a dumb comment, a sink full of dishes. You think it's about those things, but it's not. It's about you. It's about years, maybe decades, of unprocessed emotions leaking through the cracks in your carefully crafted facade. The anxiety, the chronic fear of the future, the constant sense of unease, all of it are alarms. signals that you are disconnected from essential parts of yourself, parts you rejected, you buried, you were taught to fear. Jung once said, "The shadow, when not confronted, infiltrates behavior and creates destiny." In other words, every unconscious choice you make today pushes you toward a tomorrow you don't even want, but are blindly building anyway. And here's the cruel part. The more you ignore it, the more sophisticated it becomes. It adapts. It disguises itself as empty productivity, as shallow relationships, as the endless chase for distraction. You don't even realize it, but you're living sedated, disconnected from your own soul. And now, an uncomfortable question starts to rise. Why is it that in modern society, this isn't just something that happens, it's something that's actively encouraged? If you think living in the 21st century brings you closer to who you really are, you're dead wrong. The truth is exactly the opposite. Modern society is designed to strengthen your shadow, to feed your disconnection, to turn your existence into a never-ending cycle of distraction, sedation, and superficiality. Think about it. From the moment you wake up until the moment you close your eyes, you're bombarded with stimuli, notifications, news, throwaway entertainment, advertisements, social media, all meticulously designed to capture your attention and pull you further and further away from yourself. This isn't an accident. This is psychological engineering, a system that knows exactly how to exploit your weaknesses, your emptiness, your unresolved wounds. And here's the most twisted part. This system feeds directly off your shadow, off your inner discomfort, because someone disconnected from their own essence consumes more, seeks more validation, buys more, works more, chases status, approval, relevance, endlessly. Jung warned us, modern man does not see God because he does not look within himself, where God dwells. And this God isn't the God of religion. It's the self, the center of your psyche, the very thing you should be seeking, but has been replaced by algorithms, likes, and cheap dopamine. The world wants you to believe your fulfillment is out there, in the perfect body, in the dream vacation, in the car, in the promotion, in the next video, the next notification. But that's a lie, a carefully manufactured lie. And while you stay distracted, your shadow grows. It feeds off the emptiness, off the absence of silence, off the absence of reflection, off the absence of real inner work. The result? An entire generation of men, lost, anxious, weak, disconnected. Men living in golden cages, convinced they're free, when in reality, they're slaves to their own emptiness. And now, the question rises, the question few have the courage to ask. What's the real price of spending your life running from yourself? Ignoring your shadow doesn't come cheap. It's not neutral. It's not harmless. There is a price, and it's high, brutal, destructive. The first payment comes in the form of existential emptiness. You wake up, and nothing makes sense. Work doesn't fulfill you. Money doesn't excite you. Relationships feel shallow. Everything starts to feel like a tired play, where you're stuck playing a character you don't even like that much. Then comes the exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, but the kind you feel even after sleeping, even after resting. It's the drain that comes from the constant inner fight, the endless battle of keeping locked away the parts of yourself that, deep down, only want to be seen, acknowledged, integrated, healed. And then the psychological symptoms show up. Chronic anxiety, paralyzing procrastination, addictions that feel completely out of your control, relationships that collapse, and you don't even fully understand why. A constant sense of being alive, without really living. Carl Jung didn't sugarcoat it. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. And the opposite is equally true. The one who refuses to look within stays asleep. Number sedated. You become a prisoner of your own fears. You suppress your anger, and it turns into apathy. You bury your pain, and it becomes cynicism. You deny your desire, and it morphs into hollow compulsions. Every piece of yourself that you bury comes back, warped, corrupted, destructive. And the more you run, the weaker you become, more fragile, more dependent on distractions, on external validation, on little hits of instant pleasure that keep you breathing, but never truly living. The price? It's waking up one day and realizing you've lived a life that was never yours, a life driven by fear, by masks, by running away. And the only way out is to finally face what you've spent your whole life avoiding. In the next step, you'll understand how and why the path to integration isn't pretty. It's not easy, but it's the only path that leads to freedom. If anyone ever told you that self-knowledge is all about light, peace, and gratitude, they lied, and they lied badly. Integrating your shadow isn't a walk in the park. It's a deep dive into the basement of your own soul. It's descending, step by step, into that psychic dungeon where you locked away everything that makes you feel ashamed. Everything you pretend doesn't exist. Everything you feared, and that now controls you. Jung was clear, brutally clear. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that darkness is yours. The process of integration starts with one brutally uncomfortable realization. You are not just light. You are not just kindness, discipline, love, generosity, or rationality. Inside you also lives the opposite, the impulse to destroy, to dominate, to lie, to manipulate, to desire what you shouldn't. Inside you lives fear, cowardice, years of suppressed rage. And here's the key. Integration doesn't mean elimination. It doesn't mean healing in some fluffy fantasy sense. It means recognizing. It means accepting that these parts exist and bringing them into the center of your awareness. When you deny your aggression, it turns into apathy. When you deny your will to power, it becomes procrastination. When you bury your anger, it turns against you, as anxiety, depression, guilt, and stagnation. But when you stare your shadow straight in the eye, something shifts. You realize that your aggression, when conscious, becomes assertiveness. Your will to power, when integrated, transforms into discipline. That buried rage, once acknowledged, turns into raw fuel to build the life you were meant to live. But it hurts, because this path demands the destruction of who you thought you were. It demands breaking apart the persona you spent your whole life building just to be accepted. It is, quite literally, a symbolic death. The death of the domesticated man, the asleep man, the man who spent his entire life running from himself. And only those brave enough to die psychologically earn the right to be reborn. The next step? Understanding what happens when you turn your shadow into power. There's a secret. A dark secret no one ever really told you. Everything you fear most about yourself is exactly where what you need the most is hidden. Your suppressed anger is unused vital energy. Your denied aggression is your ability to stand your ground, protect, and conquer. That desire you've spent years trying to suffocate is pure fuel for creation, ambition, and transformation. Jung knew this. That's why he said, "Where your fear is, there is your power." And no, that's not some pretty metaphor. It's a brutal psychological truth. When you integrate your shadow, you don't become a saint. You don't become some enlightened monk. You become a whole man. A man who knows his capacity for destruction and consciously chooses not to turn it against himself or the world. A man who recognizes his thirst for power and transforms it into leadership, creation, and responsibility. A man who accepts his animal nature but trains it, masters it, puts it in service of something greater. And the result? An inner strength the average man will never even taste. A presence that commands respect without having to say a word. A clarity so sharp that the noise of the world suddenly feels irrelevant. You realize the problem was never your anger, never your desire, ambition, or fear. The problem was denying it, burying it, pretending it wasn't there. When you drag your shadow into the light of consciousness, it stops being an invisible saboteur and becomes a brutal ally. You become dangerous, in the best possible sense of the word, because a dangerous man is a man who masters his impulses, not a man enslaved by them. And here's the irony. What you spent your entire life trying to hide turns out to be your greatest source of power, clarity, and freedom. The next step? Understanding how this transformation doesn't just change you, it radically reshapes everything around you. When a man integrates his shadow, something deeply symbolic happens. He stops being just another piece of the world and starts becoming the author of his own destiny. What once ruled over you, your fears, your anger, your procrastination, your anxiety, now bows to your consciousness. Because you're no longer a prisoner, no longer running, no longer numbing the emptiness with cheap pleasures, distractions, and masks. You become someone who has nothing to prove to anyone. Your validation doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It comes from the brutal silence of someone who has descended into his own hell and come back whole. And here's the fundamental difference. The man who doesn't know his shadow reacts. He reacts to his boss. He reacts to his wife. He reacts to problems. He spends his life putting out fires, chasing his own tail, fighting ghosts he created himself. But the man who has integrated his shadow acts. He chooses. He sets boundaries. He decides. He creates. He doesn't run from discomfort. He doesn't hide in modern hedonism. He refuses to be a slave to algorithms, to social expectations, or to prepackaged narratives. Jung knew this. That's why he said, "The meeting with one's own shadow is the beginning of true individuation." In other words, it's the moment when you stop being just a fragment of the collective and start becoming a true individual, a whole man, an authentic man. This process doesn't make you perfect. It doesn't free you from pain, from challenges, from suffering. But it gives you something infinitely more valuable: self-mastery. And self-mastery isn't about having absolute control over everything. It's about awareness, clarity, the ability to recognize your own impulses and choose what to do with them. The result? Stronger relationships, work with real purpose, genuine presence, and the courage to live by your principles, not by the programming that was shoved onto you. And now, standing here at this point in the journey, only one brutal question remains. Now that you know this, what are you going to do with this truth? The shadow never disappears. It never fades. It never dies. It stays there, silent, watching, testing, waiting for the moment you slip because that's how it works. That's how it survives. The man who doesn't see this is condemned, a prisoner of himself, writing day after day, chapter after chapter of a story he never chose. A story written by fears disguised as caution, by anger disguised as silence, by desire disguised as distraction. But the man who sees, the man who understands, changes everything. He stops fighting himself and starts using what once destroyed him as fuel to build. He understands that his aggression isn't a curse, it's vital energy, that his anger isn't weakness, it's a compass, that his fear isn't a sentence, it's a boundary. The shadow will never be eliminated, but it can be tamed. And when that happens, something rare emerges, a whole man. A man who doesn't fear chaos, because he carries his own chaos, tamed, inside his chest. A man who doesn't need to fake strength, because he's made peace with his own wildness. The truth is simple and brutal. The world belongs to the men who had the courage to face themselves. The rest, they just exist, living under the illusion that they're alive. But alive, they never were.